We've got only a half hour this time. Discussion panel. Our speaker this afternoon is Colin Aitken from the University of Edinburgh. He's going to talk about the relevant populations and data.
Thank you, Richard, and can I thank the organisers for the invitation. It's been a very good workshop, very interesting, and I hope I can say something of interest to the rest of you. What I'm going to talk about, I must confess I got a little worried this morning when Alicia's talk to be announced, she stood up and talked about databases. Fortunately, I think I'm saying something a wee bit different from her. I thought she might have stolen my thunder. But right, so that's the abstract for those that have not read it or need reminding of it. What I'm going to talk about, choice of populations, choice of sampling, and then I'm going to do it in the context of what work I've been doing about the quantities of cocaine on banknotes in drug-related crimes. So first of all, a little bit of history. The first three cases I think most people will be familiar with. Certainly the R versus T has got had a few mentions. The first two haven't had mentions here, but I think will be well known. This is a Collins case from the early 1960s in California, where there was a mugging in an alleyway, and an eyewitness saw a Caucasian girl with blonde hair running out of the alleyway and jumping into a yellow automobile driven by a Negro man with a beard and a moustache. And in due course there was a trial, and a couple answered that description were brought to trial, and there was a lecturer of mathematics who testified to these characteristics with these probabilities, and with no background data or anything to justify these other than his own personal impressions. Your jury told to substitute these with their own values, so there's no record of whether they did or not, and it bred a whole lot of papers and then very interesting articles about the role of probability and statistics in the law. The Shinobi case had about 5 published transcripts I've seen. Shinobi was a Nigerian student in New York who worked to earn money as a toll collector on one of the bridges. He was arrested at JFK Airport on a flight back from Nigeria, found to have drugs inside his person, the drug mules swallowing the drugs and then passing them through the body when they reached the destination. It was found under investigation he'd made 7 return trips to Nigeria over the last 15 months or so, which was very difficult to justify on a toll collector's salary from on a bridge in New York. So the courts assumed he'd made 7 drug smuggling trips, took the amount of drugs they'd had on his person when on arrest, multiplied it by 8, got a number, and there's a lot of debate as to how long he should be sentenced for. But part of to informing this debate was data from customs services for Nigerian drug mules at JFK Airport during the time period in question. The dates for the first and last trips shown on Shinobi's passport. And then, of interest to what I'm saying, are these comments at one of the judgments. The 117 cases provided by the US Customs Service cannot yield specific evidence about Shinobi. However, they do provide evidence about, a reference class, A, I suppose, not the, to which Shinobi can reasonably be said to belong. And then it's sometimes reasonable to make use of a particular reference class. And the decision as to whether you do it or not boils down to the question of whether the arguments for the use of that reference class do or do not seem reasonable, and whether the arbitrary choices do or do not strike the decision maker as outlandish. So there's some words for the linguist debate: reasonable and outlandish. So, right, the R versus T. It's been mentioned a lot about footwear. The two databases that were used, one was the internal database of the Forensic Science Service, for which they used to get data about pattern, and one for database of the Shoes and Allied Trade Research Association for SCI. So these were a couple of the databases referred to in that judgment. Right, okay, so the drugs on banknotes. I'll say a wee bit about that table. This is referring to a paper written in 2007. So a bit of a sort of background, my own personal involvement in this. I first got involved about 12 years ago now, where I wrote a defence report arguing about the nature of the banknotes in general circulation used by a company, MSA Limited in Bristol, to assess the levels of cocaine on banknotes in general circulation. Now, just about every banknote in the UK has got cocaine on it. So just to say, oh, this pile of notes have got cocaine on them, isn't really very informative as to guilt or otherwise. So the question was, if you're interested in the quantity of the cocaine, MSA had what they call background data from notes in general circulation, fairly easy to criticise because they were only taking it from certain places and so on. And I wrote a report about this. I got pretty uncomfortable writing it because I thought, okay, I'm writing a criticism, but I don't know how I would do it any better. I can't think of a better way to do it. So in this report, I wrote, if MSA want, I'm willing to help if they want me to. So a year or so later, I got this phone call, dear Colin, in your report you said you offered to help, what about it? And I thought, all right, okay. So that led to a PhD student and a case studentship and papers and so on. So I'll talk a bit about the general circulation, but I'll go back to what I said. When I wrote the defence report, I couldn't think of anything. I wanted to help because I didn't really know how to do it. And so if any of you can help me, I'll be very happy to listen to advice as to how to sample banknotes in general circulation. Right. Now, this paper was written in 2007. The data were collected in 2004 onwards. They looked at 7 factors: settlement, which is divided as rural or urban, denomination, socio-economic class, offenders, port of entry, region, and then they had this dummy factor, which was an interesting one. They put in whether the scientist was wearing the wristwatch on the right wrist or the left wrist, and threw that into the mix, and lo and behold, it was just as significant as anything else. So that was okay. Now the next bit, there's 100 used banknotes. Right, and then you say general circulation withdrawn over a counter at banks. And that's where the problems start, the criticism. Banks don't provide a sample of notes from general circulation. Right, there are the 8 towns that the banks were chosen from. I can't match them up to I can't remember which is attached to which, but I do remember thinking the residents of Troon probably weren't very happy with their classification and so on. It can be quite amusing to see what MSA thought of the residents and what the residents might have thought. Anyway, we have Oxford and Folkestone, Grangemouth, Troon, Dunfermline and Burnt Island are in Scotland, Cardiff and Pontyclun are in, well, my new professor in Edinburgh, who's Welsh, says it's, well, socio-economic factors are quite low. So, anyway,
So the classification you showed us, that applies to the places?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so these factors, apart from the wristwatch, and so they assigned these 8. There was a Plackett Burnham design for the technically minded. There's a paper in Biometrica explaining all the designs of it.
Why the focus on Scotland? More criminal.
Sorry. Questions about why they did such and such 10 years ago. Please ask MSE. Right, anyway, the results of all that supported the proposition that there were no inferences upon the contamination patterns of banknotes obtained in the banking system by socio-economic or criminal act. So, that was okay. And there's quite a few appeal court judgments from the late 2000s saying the MSA's database is fine, basically. And then this problem arose. I think it was the 2014 court, but the judgment, I think, came out in the beginning of January 2015. A trial of first instance in Sheffield. This is the judge. This is a database of pure convenience. Okay. The assertion that notes from banks are typical is not supported by any evidence and is illogical. Now, I don't know where that statement came from. I don't know where he's got his evidence that it's illogical. But then a much more recent paper. Well, that's what I'm going to be talking about. We've submitted a paper in publication. Much more objectively scrutinised. Okay, so peer review's out. It's not objective enough. Cross-examination. My experience of cross-examination is it's not objective, and it can certainly be exaggerated questions and so on, and dealing very closely with the database. So that was another phone call from MSA and wanting some help, and the forensic science regulator was involved. It's a bit slightly embarrassing, but the forensic science regulator asked me to write what was thought to be, or could be said to be, an independent review. Now, everybody knows I work closely with MSA, but it started off working for the other side. And anyway, the forensic science regulator wrote a report, so calm down, this database is okay, you can. But unfortunately, there's been quite a few cases coming up to criticising it. So, what we've got, it's always possible to argue a particular level of a particular factor specific to a particular case has not been studied. That's easy. So, we don't have every city in the sampling notes from it. This case was in Sheffield. We didn't have notes from Sheffield. There may be some in the overall database. I don't know. It's all right. So you take a sample in some way from a population deemed relevant to a particular case at the time of the police investigation. That seems to be the argument. If you're going to have general circulation, you need to have notes in general circulation that are associated in some way with the case at the time of the police investigation. Right. So where do we go from there? You take notes from an area. It might be too large, might be too small. And this note, notes originating in one area may rapidly end up in another end of the country. The banknotes handled by drug dealers will mix in the system, precluding a stable. And that's still true. I can say a wee bit more later about the circulation of banknotes. But the clue is in the name, circulation. Most banknotes pass through banks. There are also distribution centres for banknotes accumulate, and so on. So notes go in and out of banks. And the Bank of England's written papers about circulation of banknotes.
So
that area.
What does precluding?
Sorry?
What does precluding here mean? So if the notes rapidly end up in...
The mix in the system, meaning you won't get a stable geographical population of banknotes. So banknotes in Sheffield don't stay in Sheffield.
There'll be no
But
geographical
isn't
structure.
this an argument that they will end up looking like that?
No,
They will-
they rapidly end up in another, the mix. They move around the country.
In the long run, they end up all over the place.
Yeah.
So then it's stable.
So
It's
then
not-
it's stable because it's mixed.
It's stable in the sense of England and Wales. It's not stable in banknotes in Sheffield stay in Sheffield.
Okay.
Right, so what do we do about type of the relevance for type of source? All right, you make a seizure is made in a casino, so there's basically a seizure of banknotes made in a casino, taken to MSA for analysis. What do you use for general circulation? Well, do you use casinos? Use the same casino. Few businesses carry, where there's areas where large crime, carry large quantities of cash on their premises for certain. So banknotes pass into the banking system, go to regional sorting centres or back into the general public. Regional sorting centres, they go back out again into general circulation, apart from notes deemed unfit for circulation. So, right, now, we've had quite a bit of talk about propositions. Norman talked about them earlier this morning. For the research Amy Wilson and I were doing, which was to look at trying to model likelihood ratios for quantities of cocaine on banknotes, we had long discussions about propositions. But those are the two we came up with. The banknotes are associated with a person who is involved with criminal activity involving cocaine, and the banknotes are associated with a person who is not involved with criminal activity involving cocaine. So that was, well, we thought that was fine until, and just at the last minute, the paper accepted for publication about to come out, and Richard Sleeman phoned up, Colin, I'm not quite happy about that proposition. I said, Richard, go away, it's publishing. I mean, well, still. That's what we worked with. So for the numerator, we need associated with criminal activity. And those are what we used. The previous work, Carl Ebiger's paper, used banknotes that had been brought in by law enforcement agencies. But we thought about it, well, those aren't necessarily associated with crime, they just happen to be picked up in a criminal investigation. So, criminal cases in which the defendant was convicted of a drug crime involving cocaine. Criticised because he may have a false conviction, but that applies to all definitions. You can't, in a sense, if you're convicted of a crime involving cocaine, that's it, by definition, in our system, as I understand it. And then they said, no, you have to collect the data, catch them red-handed. So the only data that would be, or this data would be found surrounded by cocaine by police in a raid. That's the only ones that would fit criminal activity. My feeling about that is, well, then you have an argument about innocent until proven guilty. So, it's one of my questions. This is what we use. I'm open to suggestions for something else. Right, now the general circulation. So, seize them in a... That's the seizure. So the seizure comes in to MSA from police, revenue, or whoever. They've got the notes in general circulation in their database that's just accumulated over years and years. They've got the, well, for Amy's work we had notes associated with crime. What MSA do is what they do is just use personal experience and make a comment on how these compare with what's in general circulation. So, what do we use for the denominator? Casino, nightclub.
Sorry, are you talking about drugs on notes seized in a particular.
Oh yeah, so, yeah.
Because
Okay. Right. And then the database of the denominator will be that same casino nightclub. I don't know. Anyway, that's put that out for thought. Right. So here's a whole lot of things that Alicia mentioned sampling frames. I don't know how you get a sampling frame for notes from general circulation. I did float the idea of making a list of all the banknote serial numbers and then taking a random sample from the list of serial numbers, but that's not really practical. So, so what happens to notes? They go 75% go to automatic telling machines, banks, post offices, or outlets. They're paid by businesses into banks, typically go to the distribution centres. I think they did eventually tell us the number. They're rather coy about that, understandably. And money goes directly. We eventually got money for what we did for our work. We got money from 8 of these distribution centres. The money is sorted into 3 categories. The A-fit goes to ATMs, the B-fit go to branches or banks, and unfit, there are not very many of those, but they go to the Bank of England centres for destruction. Right, so and then the notes go out to ATMs, the B-fits go to distributed cash, banknotes to security companies, which replenish the ATMs, and then unlikely to be paid out over the counter in the same branch. There may be it's a little bit vague. I mean, the Bank of England's giving us slightly conflicting information, or the local bank in Bristol said they were paying money out over the counter. So I'm not. So things change a wee bit. Right then. Right. This paper is only just submitted, so I don't quite know what its fate will be. But so we use the unfit notes, 8 redistribution centres, and we speak to the Bank of England as to which ones we used. Proportions, we used proportions of different denominations in circulation, so but then it's not necessary, actually, the quantities of drugs on banknotes doesn't vary with the denomination, so I mean that's another criticism of the MSE, that the number of £10 notes and £20 notes don't match that in general circulation, but I don't think that matters. And then, right, okay, so that's the general circulation. Now the purpose of the paper was to show that location didn't matter, and that's what we hoped we would find. So that the trials in Sheffield could use the MSA database from notes collected from, well, mainly from banks in Bristol. So, and what we've got, so this is a slightly technical bit, we've got 8 distribution centres, we've got 2 samples of notes from each centre. There were 2 analysts in MSA and 2 instruments, and then they analysed the 2 ends of the notes. So 8 locations, 2 samples from each location, the ends of the notes, the analyst and the machine. Most places we got 120 notes from, some we got 125. We don't know why we got different. We asked for a certain number and some people didn't quite come up with it. So that was the design. Mixed effects models. So we looked at differences, fixed effects, analyst, location and machine. So with 8 locations, 2 analysts, 2 machines. We assumed there wasn't an association from one end of the note to the other with the amount of drug on it. So the Queen's head on the other end could just spread randomly. And the 2 samples we got from the distribution centres, we don't know how they were made up, so we just treated them as random. And if you're, these are the 9 models. And we used Ikaike and Bayes information criterion, and down here you get, well, this is the one, it's got the lowest BIC and just about the lowest AIC, but it doesn't include location. So we're using basically those results to justify saying that location doesn't matter. These are box plots of residuals. This is the model we used. So these are the locations, these are the residuals, and they're all sort of randomly distributed about 0. Those are scatter plots of residuals. That's if you include location, and that's if you don't. These two are actually different. It takes quite a bit of while looking to, you probably won't be able to detect it. So, our conclusions from all of that. The inclusion of location of banknote as a factor in the model makes little difference to the goodness of fit. So, there's no meaningful support for the proposition of regional variation in quantities of cocaine, banknotes in general circulation, England and Wales. And again, it's always possible to argue more is better. But we reckon that if you're going to tailor the background database for a particular case, it might not be all that important. And those are the, so this is the one that's been submitted for publication. That's Carl Ebiger's paper, and these are the Amy's work about modelling the quantities of cocaine on banknotes. It uses hidden Markov models and all sorts of things. And at the moment, it's far too complex and technical to be used in courts. It's just basically, Amy's the only person that can actually do that. It needs a lot of technical skill to use that method. I think that's 2 o'clock.
Thank you very much, Colin. So we have time for a couple of questions. Ask Norman first.
Sorry.
Okay, I declare an interest here because I have been involved in a couple of cases on the opposite side.
Yeah, I should have said, Norman and I were on opposite sides about 2 weeks
I'll
ago.
therefore declare what actually my main concern is.
Well, I'm glad to hear. Because the court's not the best place to discuss these things.
So the issue is, in my view, not the issue of the potential differences in location. It's the fact that almost all of the banknotes in MSA's sample come direct from banks. It's 91%. And what is not represented there, almost at all, are the 10%, and so it's not a small number, the 10% of banknotes which actually never get redistributed because those are the unfit notes. They're the ones classified as unfit. Right? So the
I didn't realise it was as big as 10%.
10%. Well, that's what I was told, but whatever, those aren't represented. And therefore the key issue is, they may be, we don't know, they may be the notes, those 10%, they're the ones, the old crinkled used notes, they may be the ones.
No, well, can I say, this is perhaps a spoiler, but let's spring it on you. Well, I got an email this week, because the MSA were finally asked the banks where the banknotes came from. So they go into the banks, mostly, as Norman said, 90% bank, and most of them in Bristol, I think one branch. And certainly I always thought, well, the unfit notes got cleared out. But what they're doing, the bank gives the MSA money that's paid in by the public, anybody that comes in. The unfit notes aren't cleared out at that stage. They send, if at the end of a day or whatever, the notes go to the distribution centres, it's the distribution centres that take the unfit notes. So,
I think
that'll help.
That is an important.
It is an important. Yeah, I'm sorry, I only realised it 2 days ago.
The question I got to you was in your news study.
Yeah.
Why didn't you do a direct, since you now had the definitely unfit notes?
Yeah.
Did you not do a comparison of the levels of drug contamination between those and the notes which were not deemed unfit? Because then, if there was no difference in those, then that kind of like solves the problem.
I agree. I think I plead time.
Sorry?
I think I plead time. This was only done in the last 2 or 3 months, and the data's all sitting there.
Right.
So I think yes, we'll now go back to MSA and thank you, because we'll go back to look at this. And, well, I mean, I think I've heard, and even more recently, I think last night, Byron Morgan sent me some data to comparing with what they have. So my plead of time is I didn't have time between the dinner and this morning. I've got several Excel, but yes, we'll be having a look at that. But,
Short question from
Yeah. What level of contamination were you detecting on the notes, and were you actually attempting to measure the degree of contamination?
oh yeah, the whole thing is based on quantities of contamination.
So in fact, you have information about possible association between degree of contamination, which suggests
Oh, yeah.
was the primary source,
Yeah.
and place.
Yeah, no, we've got association. We've got the two sets of notes, the ones associated with crime and the ones in general circulation. And they all have cocaine on them, or nearly all. But the level of, the quantity of cocaine on the crime notes is generally higher, but the crime notes also have general circulation notes in them.
Yeah.
So you've then got, the crime database is a mixture.
Sure.
So then
But also, once a crime note gets into general circulation, it will contaminate by contact.
Yes.
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 That's why there's contamination.
This is why we write PhD theses and publish papers about it.
Okay.
But as
We can.
Yeah. Oh,
continues,
Yes. Yes.
so you
Yes. Yeah.
We can return to this in half an hour's time.